Are you passionate about foreign policy, national security, and the latest in domestic politics? Consider becoming a member of the DSR Network, your go-to source for in-depth analysis and insightful discussions. With the DSR Network podcasts, stay ahead of the curve on global affairs. Each episode features top experts, policymakers, and thought leaders who break down complex issues into digestible, engaging conversations. From breaking news to historical context, we cover the topics that matter most. Whether it's the intricacies of international diplomacy, the latest in national security strategies, or the dynamics of U.S. politics, the DSR Network has you covered. Members receive an ad-free listening experience, bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, enhanced show notes for select podcasts, and much more. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code GRADUATE to receive 30% off the regular membership price for the first year or first month. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code GRADUATE. Thank you very much for your support.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. In the wake of Donald Trump's conviction on 34 felony counts in Manhattan, Republicans are almost uniformly rallying behind him and casting the verdict as entirely illegitimate. By contrast, Democrats are not engaging this debate nearly as intensively and appear at least somewhat divided over how to proceed. This is puzzling to a lot of people out there. In short, the Republican response to Trump's convictions is deranged and reckless and directly hostile to the rule of law. It would almost certainly be deeply unpopular if voters are made to understand it. So today we're talking to Celinda Lake, a veteran Democratic strategist and pollster who has been willing to suggest a more aggressive posture for the party. She's going to try to help us understand what's really going on among Democratic elites on the Trump conviction question right now and how the party might find a stronger and more unified posture going forward. Thanks so much for coming on, Celinda.
Thanks for having me.
So you've been on pretty much every type of campaign over the years, presidential, Senate, House, everything. And it seems to me that the response from Democrats on this has been mixed. On the one hand, the Washington Post reported that some Democratic challengers taking on vulnerable House GOP incumbents have jumped on the conviction. But on the other, Senate Democrats in very tough races seem quiet, and so does Biden world. Do you have a sense of whether, the president aside, the super PACs and outside groups allied with Biden are going to take this on in a serious way? Maybe with a big communication effort, paid media, drawing attention to the fact that the GOP nominee is a convicted felon?
Well, I won't speak on behalf of anyone, but I think the posture that we should be taking, I think the president is doing exactly the right thing. I think he should be presidential. The contrast is very vivid between the convicted felon and the person as being president. I think it's great that he's been doing things in the international realm and showing calm, steady leadership, knowledge, and presidential and respectful leadership. So I think his posture is perfect. I think this also provides the opportunity, though, to draw a real character contrast. And in the end, 40% of the presidential vote is determined by assessments of character. Now, issues can matter in terms of character, but right now, a lot of voters are deciding between weak and strong. This draws a different contrast between chaos and narcissism and respect and presidential demeanor, someone you can be proud of internationally and nationally. And so I think that Democrats can push that contrast vividly and talk about the fact, think about what a second and third term of Donald Trump, because he said he's going for a third term, would actually be like. Think of the revenge and vindication tour. Think of what someone who is a convicted felon and is willing to have January 6th and call for votes in Georgia actually would be like as president. So I think it's part and parcel of a very vivid character contrast, and I think you'll see it show up in those contrasts by other people.
Yeah, I mean, there's a clear way that Democrats can prosecute this case, and you really kind of got it there. I mean, they can say that a convicted criminal has no place running for president, and that Trump's conviction upheld the principle that no American is above the law. And they can rightly say that the Republican defense of Trump is utterly reckless and crazy, right? I mean, there's got to be a way to weave this into a broader case about Trump's serial corruption, Republican extremism, and so forth, isn't there?
I think there is. And I think there's also a way to mobilize Democrats. Right now, the Trump voters have been more mobilized. But I think, even I honestly thought we'll never get 34 convictions. And I was stunned. And the fact that 12 ordinary people can make this decision, hold someone who was president of the United States accountable, that's really empowering. And as the Biden team said, as a lot of Democrats have said, now let's go to the ballot box and really hold the whole MAGA team accountable. So I think it's mobilizing. I think this character contrast is very persuasive, particularly to women voters and independent women voters. And I think people are just still figuring out how to use it. But the voters have been paying a lot of attention to this. And I think the one thing that we need to emphasize is that this was not a decision by a judge or a prosecutor. This was a decision of 12 ordinary people, a jury. And that's really powerful to voters.
I think there's no doubt about it. Democrats can say additionally that Republicans tried to put Trump above the law and tried to destroy the system in order to do that. But ordinary Americans, a jury of Trump's peers, said no and stood up and were actually quite brave and heroic in the process.
That's right. That's exactly, and quite clear. And 34 times they said no. And I think it's also really important to talk about the fact that these 34 times were about election interference. It is unacceptable to have someone running for president who tried to undermine our elections. It's just unacceptable.
I think you hit a really key point before when you said that part of the point of emphasizing this would be Democratic mobilization. At the same time, there would probably be some kind of potential demobilizing effect among Democratic voters if Democrats just kind of avoid this debate and let Republicans own it entirely. I mean, you focus group with these types of voters a whole lot. What is the risk of not taking this on sufficiently?
I think the risk of not taking it on sufficiently is it doesn't get defined. It gets partially understood. It gets processed as a hush money trial. It gets processed as a judge made this decision rather than no. A jury of ordinary people held this guy accountable. And that's what democracy means. And we can hold them accountable at the ballot box. And then I think the whole fact that this was about election interference and undermining our elections and fits in with January 6th in the Georgia case, that this team and this person will do anything to hold on to power, including talking about not just a second term, but a third term and being the forever president and then appointing his follow-up from his own family. I mean, there is no limit to there is no boundary on this guy. There's no limit to what he will do to threaten democracy. And this jury courageously, as you said, proved that ordinary people, if we join together, can hold them accountable. We can say no, and we can enforce no.
It also seems to me that Democrats can take solace from the position that Republicans are in, which is really quite terrible. Some vulnerable House Republicans are being conspicuously quiet about the conviction, and yet at the same time, House Speaker Mike Johnson is calling on the Supreme Court to step in, and GOP leaders are promising to bring Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg to testify about the prosecution. I mean, this is truly unhinged stuff. Johnson is talking about defunding the other prosecutions, the federal ones, although I don't think he'd be able to go through with that. The point, though, is that Republicans feel obliged to show that they're doing the absolute maximum for Trump, and yet the marginal members facing tough races can't want that. I mean, that's a show of weakness, right? It seems to call for an aggressive Democratic posture. Am I misreading the situation here?
Well, I think part of it is the Republicans are digging themselves in a hole, and we have a saying in our business that when your opponent is digging themselves in a hole, get out of the way and let them do it. I honestly was surprised at how fast a lot of the MAGA Republicans came on board. And I think it speaks to how terrified they are of the Trump faction in their party, how dependent they are on the small dollar contributions, how afraid they are of the Trump voters not voting for them. And it's not, I was born and raised a Republican. It's not my father's and mother's Republican Party anymore. And you have people like Larry Hogan who are in swing races, or those candidates that are sitting in congressional districts, largely won by Biden, that are being much quieter. But I think it speaks to how much the MAGA faction is in control of the Republican Party and how out of bounds it is. And so I think part of this is not just voting against Trump, but voting against the whole MAGA faction. This is something that has to be stopped now. And our system has few controls. It's so out of bounds. It's so inconceivable that we have to stand up. We have to join together. We have to say no now, not just to Donald Trump, but the entire MAGA faction.
So I know it's true that people in the business often say things like, if your opponent is digging a hole for himself or herself, just get out of the way. But at the same time, what you said earlier seems almost more applicable, right? I mean, with Republicans uniformly declaring the convictions illegitimate and declaring Trump a victim in every conceivable forum, doesn't that imbalance threaten to mislead the American people in a big way? If all they're hearing is from Republicans saying that convictions are banana republic stuff, you kind of hinted at that. I wondered if you could expand on it a bit.
I think it is important. Again, I think the president has done a perfect job, and I think he should stay doing what he's doing. But I do think we need to create a greater echo chamber than we have right now. They have a very rapid echo chamber that is always immediately in place and repetitious to a fault. And I think we need to have more repetition about, and again, just clarifying, this was a jury of 12 ordinary people who held the most powerful person in America accountable. And we need to do it at the ballot box in November. This is a fundamental test of character. It's a fundamental reveal that we have someone who will introduce chaos, who will do anything to hold on to power, who is completely about himself, versus someone who is respectful, who is presidential, who is steady, stable leadership. That's the choice we face in November. And then we have a whole faction behind Trump that needs to be stopped as well.
Exactly. It seems to me that by engaging aggressively, you can also point out that Republicans are running interference for Trump and trying to place him beyond the law, and even threatening to do things like defund prosecutions and so forth. I mean, let me ask you this, though, Celinda. So let's say the party did engage this aggressively. Again, I agree with you that the president himself can't really do that. It's his Department of Justice that's currently prosecuting Trump, so there's a reasonable argument for him being, pretty quiet about it, or at least sort of sticking to the line he has. But let's say the super PACs, the outside groups, the DNC engaged this. What would that look like? Would you do ads that weave this in?
I don't think we need ads particularly. I just think we need more of an echo chamber. And a lot of our ads are not going up until September, October. And we should not deviate from our central message of abortion and economics and that contrast. But again, when 40% of the vote is determined by character, and when in some ways the character distinction between these two people is the most vivid that we've ever had, then I think it's important to bring out the character piece. And in some ways, particularly among women voters, we're not creating an argument. We're tapping into the responsive chord. Trump's numbers with women have been going down. They didn't even like what they were seeing during the trial, much less the result of this trial. With Democrats who are more disaffected, who are discouraged, this can be very empowering for them. So I think it can be done in social media. I think it can be done in our narrative. I think our candidates can be clear on it. And I think we can create more of an echo chamber than we have without totally devoting all of our advertising to it.
I think what you're talking about here is making more noise around this, right? The candidates talk about it constantly. And of course, absolutely, abortion rights and Biden's achievements as president are critical. But I think what you're talking about is, in addition to that, really making it clear over and over with repetition, with loudness, right? With aggressive communication that the GOP nominee is a felon. And
what he's been convicted of and the behavior he's shown during the trial and after, and that produce these kinds of acts. I mean, I think the Democratic line should be character matters. And there's a real character distinction here. We don't have to go on and on and on. There's one person who is leadership that is chaotic, narcissistic, and will do anything to stay in power and gain power. And there's another person who is presidential, represents steady, stable leadership, and is respect. Who do you want as president? Who do you want as the role model for your children? Who do you want as standing up for the United States of America in foreign arenas and domestic arenas? There's no contest here when you look at the character of these two men.
So how do they bring the conviction into that? What do they say?
I think what I just said. I don't think we have to belabor it. I think drawing the distinction and informing voters that it was about election interference and that it was a jury of his peers that criminally convicted Donald Trump is really, really important.
Okay. I think what frustrates a lot of people out there is, and I'd like to ask you if you think this is right, that Democratic consultant world, present company excluded, of course, kind of just automatically takes a cautious posture in these situations, going in focus. I would imagine that a lot of focus grouping and polling is going on right now around the conviction. Is it wrong for people to sort of wonder why Republicans are just so much more aggressive on something like this kind of automatically?
I think that people are gathering themselves. I think that some of this is settling in. So I do think the consultant class is often too establishment, too cautious, too slow to react. I think people are waiting for direction. But I think, again, to me, it's very simple. This can be used to mobilize voters. 12 people did it. We joining together can really do it, hold this MAGA team accountable. And secondly, I think the character contrast is something that will vividly play out. And there are other events, the sentencing, the appeal, the convention. I mean, in some ways, there's a series of events here that are going to present this vivid contrast. And I think a series of opportunities for Democrats to respond.
Right. One would think that they'd be a little more prepared when the next sort of chapters in this happen. While I've got you here, and I know you've got to run, what's your take on the debate over young and minority voters, the ones who seem to be drifting to Trump, the low propensity voters? There's a big conversation right now in the media and among Democrats about this. Where are you on them? What can be done to win them back? And is there a role for the Trump conviction in that?
Oh, I think there's a role for the Trump conviction just in empowering everyone and saying, ordinary people joining together can produce change. I think the younger people, the people of color that are defecting, a lot of that's around the economy. And that's why we have to, as President Obama said, we have to chew and walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to have a steady economic message. We have to show what we're doing. We have to say it's not good enough. We're going to keep at it till everybody's doing better. And it's tough days out there for a lot of people. So I think that is something we have to do to mobilize young people. And I think that the abortion issue is going to be very, very powerful, particularly the younger women. I think you're going to see record high turnout of younger women, and it's going to make a big difference for Democrats across the country.
In other words, the abortion rights is going to pull back some of those those wandering elements in the Democratic coalition.
Right.
We're talking about independent women, low propensity voters, those types.
Younger women, Latinas who are very, very strong, African American women who think that some of this, because of child maternal health differences, is a matter of life and death. It's not just pregnancy. The fact that people, Idaho's losing its doctors, medication abortion, which is a huge proportion of abortions now about to be outlawed. And I think those late June Supreme Court decisions are going to carry a lot of weight and have some mobilizing effect, particularly on younger women, independent women, low propensity women.
So when it really comes down to it, you think that problem will resolve itself?
I think I don't think it'll resolve itself. I think we have to be an active participant in resolving it. But I think we have the tools to do that.
Okay. Well, Celinda Lake, you've been through this a lot of times, and, I would expect and hope that you're right. Thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Folks, we have some good content for you up at TNR.com. David Rothkopf, writing about how in the former Eastern Bloc they're terrified of a Trump presidency because to them, authoritarian rule is not theoretical. And Michael Tomasky explaining how it's up to Democrats to make Donald Trump's conviction matter. We'll see you all tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler on the DSR Network.